First question of this part of the series. You have Azure subscription that includes following Azure file shares. There are two file shares with the name of Share 1 and Share 2. They are hosted in storage account 1 and their location is West US. You have the following on-premise servers. There are two servers, Server 1 and Server 2. Server 1 has two folders named as Folder 1 and Folder 2, which are hosted in D and E drive respectively. Then Server 2 has a folder named Data, which is hosted in D drive. You create a storage sync service named Sync 1 and an Azure file sync group named Group 1. Group 1 uses Share 1 as a cloud endpoint. You register Server 1 and Server 2 in Sync 1. You add D folder 1 on Server 1 as a server endpoint of Group 1. For each of the following statements, select yes if the statement is true, otherwise select no. Let's look at first statement. But before we go to that, make sure you have read this description very carefully as it might get confusing. There is a talk about cloud endpoint, there is a talk about server endpoint, and then there is a talk about sync group as well. So let's look at first statement. Share 2 can be added as a cloud endpoint for Group 1. You need to tell whether this statement is true or not. A sync group can contain only one cloud endpoint or Azure file share and at least one server endpoint. And based on the question statement, Group 1 uses Share 1 as cloud endpoint, so the statement is incorrect. Share 2 cannot be added as a cloud endpoint for Group 1. Now the second statement is D data on Server 2 can be added as a server endpoint for Group 1. A sync group can have multiple server endpoints as I stated earlier, so this statement is correct. D data on Server 2 can be added as a server endpoint for Group 1. The third statement is E folder 2 on Server 1 can be added as a server endpoint for Group 1. Azure File Sync does not support more than one server endpoint from the same server in the same sync group, so the statement is incorrect. Folder 1 in D drive on Server 1 is already added as a server endpoint of Group 1, which is why you can't add another folder from the same server as endpoint in Group 1. Friends, I hope this gives you clarification of why I have chosen whether statement 1, 2, or 3 are correct or incorrect. If you have any doubts, please post them in the comment section and I'll try to give you explanation as soon as possible. Question number 112 of the series. You have an Azure file sync group that has the endpoints shown in the following table. There are three endpoints with the name of endpoint 1, endpoint 2, and endpoint 3. Endpoint 1 is a cloud endpoint, whereas 2 and 3 are server endpoint. Cloud peering is enabled for endpoint 3. You add a file named file1 to endpoint 1 and a file named file2 to endpoint 2. On which endpoints will file 1 and 2 be available within 24 hours of adding the files? To answer, select the appropriate options. So for file 1, the options are endpoint 1, endpoint 3, endpoint 2 and endpoint 3, then endpoint 1, 2, and 3. File 1 was added to endpoint 1, which is a cloud endpoint, and a cloud endpoint is scanned by the detection job every 24 hours. So file 1 will be available on endpoint 1 only within 24 hours. If the question said where it will be available after 24 hours, then it would have been available on all endpoints by then. So the key to answer this question is availability whether within 24 hours or after 24 hours. So I always recommend you to pay attention to the keywords in the question, because if they would have mentioned available after 24 hours, then the answer would have changed and you would have chosen the last option, which is all endpoints. Then let's look at second part of this question, file 2. Again, your options are endpoint 2 only, endpoint 3 only, endpoint 2 and endpoint 3 only, and then endpoint 1, 2, and 3. File 2 was added to endpoint 2, which is a server endpoint. And with the on-premise servers, the file is scanned and synced automatically after it's being added. So it will be available on all three endpoints within 24 hours. In this case, time frame doesn't really matter. So the answer will remain same even if the scenario in the question says after 24 hours. Next question. You have an Azure subscription that contains 10 virtual machines. The virtual networks are hosted in separate resource groups. Another administrator plans to create several network resource security groups in the subscription. You need to ensure that when an NSG is created, it automatically blocks TCP port 8080 between the virtual networks. The solution you provide is from these resource providers blade, you unregister the Microsoft.Classic network provider. You need to tell whether this solution meets the goal. Unregistering the Microsoft.Classic network provider from the resource providers blade will not meet the goal of automatically blocking TCP port 8080 between the virtual networks. In this case, you need to use a custom policy definition. You will create a custom policy definition here to achieve the goal. So, for example, if in the solution there was mention of creating a custom policy definition, then you would have chosen yes, this solution will meet the goal. Next question. You have a production Azure Active Directory tenant named contoso.com. You deploy a development Azure Active Directory tenant, and then you create several custom administrative roles in the development tenant. You need to copy the roles to the production tenant. What should you do first? Your options are: from a production tenant, create a new custom role. From the production tenant, create an administrative unit. From the development tenant, export the custom roles to JSON. From the development tenant, perform a backup. To copy custom administrative roles from the development Azure AD tenant to the production Azure AD tenant, you should first export the custom roles to JSON from the development tenant. Exporting the custom roles to JSON allows you to capture the role definitions and configurations. After exporting, you can then import these JSON files into the production tenant to recreate the custom roles with the same settings. This is a common approach for migrating custom roles between Azure AD tenants. Question number 115 of the series. You plan to use Azure Network Watcher to perform the following tasks. The tasks are: identify a security rule that prevents a network packet from reaching an Azure virtual machine. Then the second task is validate outbound connectivity from an Azure virtual machine to an external host. Which feature should you use for each task? To answer, select the appropriate option below. Now for task 1, the features mentioned are traffic analytics, security group view, packet capture, next hop, IP flow verify. The correct answer here is IP flow verify. IP flow verify checks if a packet is allowed or denied to or from a virtual machine. The information consists of direction, protocol, local IP, remote IP, local port, and a remote port. If the packet is denied by a security group, the name of the rule that denied the packet is returned. While any source or destination IP can be chosen, IP flow verify helps administrators quickly diagnose connectivity issues from or to the internet and from or to the on-premise environment. Then we have task 2, and the options are again same. And the correct answer here would be connection troubleshoot. Connection troubleshoot enables you to test a connection between a virtual machine scale set, an application gateway, or a bastion host and a virtual machine, an FQDN, a URI, or an IPv4 address. Next question. You have deployed an application named App1 in Azure. App1 is deployed on 2 Azure virtual machines named VM1 and VM2. You plan to implement an Azure availability set for App1. The solution must ensure that App1 is available during planned maintenance of the servers hosting VM1 and VM2. What should you include in the availability set? Your options are single update domain, single fault domain, 2 update domains, 2 fault domains. To ensure that your application is available during planned maintenance of the servers hosting VM1 and VM2, you should include two update domains in the availability set. Update domains are used to control the order in which virtual machines are updated during planned maintenance events such as system updates. By having two update domains, Azure ensures that VM1 and VM2 are not updated at the same time. This helps in maintaining application availability during updates. If the question had a mention of ensuring availability in unplanned maintenance due to hardware failure and other issues, then you would need to include two fault domains. It is critical you pay attention to these small keywords, as I always say, while answering these questions, as the answer changes with just a slight change in the keyword. Let's look at next question. You have an Azure subscription that contains the public load balancers shown in the following table. Now you have two load balancers named LB1 and LB2. LB1 is of basic SKU type and LB2 is of standard SKU type. You plan to create 6 virtual machines and to load balance requests to the virtual machines. Each load balancer will load balance 3 virtual machines. You need to create the virtual machines for the planned solution. How should you create the virtual machines? The virtual machines that will be load balanced by using LB1 must, and then you have 4 options. Be created in the same resource group, run the same operating system, be connected to the same virtual network, be created in the same availability set or virtual machine scale set. You need to focus here on the SKUs of the load balancers, as that's the key to answer this question. All the data apart from that is literally a distractor and doesn't really make any difference to the chosen options. LB1 is a basic load balancer which are quite restrictive and only support load balancing of virtual machines in a single availability set or virtual machine scale set. So the correct answer here would be the last option. Be created in the same availability set or virtual machine scale set. Let's look at next part of this question. The virtual machines that will be load balanced by using LB2 must. Your options are again same, but LB2 is a standard load balancer which supports load balancing of any virtual machine or virtual machine scale set in a single virtual network. So the correct answer here would be third option. Be connected to the same virtual network. Next question. You manage a virtual network named VNet1 that is hosted in the East US Azure region. VNet1 hosts 2 virtual machines named VM1 and VM2 that run Windows Server. You need to inspect all the network traffic from VM1 to VM2 for a period of 3 hours. The solution you provide is from Azure Network Watcher, you create a packet capture. Does the solution meet the goal? You need to choose between yes or no. Network Watcher provides network monitoring and diagnostic capabilities in Azure, including the ability to capture packet flowing between resources within a virtual network. So yes, the statement or the solution is correct. Creating a packet capture using Azure Network Watcher is a valid solution to inspect all the network traffic from VM1 to VM2 for a specified period. Question number 119 of the series. You have a script that creates several VMs with different images. When the script issues the command to create the first VM, you do not want to block the script while the VM is created. Instead, you want the script to immediately move on to the next command. What is the best way to do this? Your options are use the ampersand to run the process in the background, add the no-wait argument to your create command, add the async argument to your create command. To avoid blocking the script while creating a virtual machine and immediately move on to the next command, you should use the no-wait argument with your create command. This argument tells the Azure CLI or any other relevant tool you are using to create VMs not to wait for the operation to complete and instead return control to the script immediately. It allows you to continue executing other commands in the script while the VM creation process happens in the background. Let's look at why other options are not correct. Using the ampersand to run the process in the background is typically used in shell scripting, but may not be as straightforward or platform independent as using the no-wait argument, which is designed for Azure CLI. The async argument is also related to asynchronous operations, but may not be suitable for specific use cases of creating VMs. Question number 120 of the series. You have an Azure subscription. You plan to deploy an Azure Kubernetes service AKS cluster to support an app named App1. On-premise clients connect to App1 by using the IP address of the pod. For the AKS cluster, you need to choose a network type that will support App1. What should you choose? Your options are hybrid connection endpoints, Azure Private Link, Kubernetes, Azure Container Networking Interface CNI. Let's look at first option first. Hybrid connection endpoints are used for connecting on-premise applications to resources in Azure securely. They are typically used for integrating Azure services with on-premise services. This option is unrelated to configuring networking within an AKS cluster to support direct access to pods by on-premise clients, so an incorrect choice. Second option, Azure Private Link, is used to access Azure services privately over a private endpoint in your virtual network. It is often used for scenarios where you want to access Azure services privately, such as Azure SQL database or Azure storage. While it provides a secure and private connection, it is not designed for directly accessing individual pods within an AKS cluster from on-premise clients, making it an incorrect choice here. The third option, Kubernetes, is a basic networking mode for AKS that provides a simple and low-cost networking solution. In Kubernetes, each node in the AKS cluster gets an IP address and pods share the node's IP address. This mode is not suitable for scenarios where you need to have direct connectivity to individual pods, as pods do not have their own dedicated IP address. This leaves us with final option, Azure CNI, which is the correct choice here. To support an app where on-premise clients connect to the pods in the AKS cluster using the IP address of the pod, you should choose the Azure Container Networking Interface as the network type. Azure CNI allows each pod in the AKS cluster to have its own IP address, which makes it easier to interact with the pods directly using their IP address. This is particularly useful when you have on-premise clients connecting to the pods within the AKS cluster. You have an Azure subscription named Subscription 1. Subscription 1 contains the resources in the following table. The resources with the name RG1 and RG2 are resource group type, and then you have two resources named VNet1 and VNet2, which are virtual network type. VNet1 is in RG1, VNet2 is in RG2, and there is no connectivity between VNet1 and VNet2. An administrator named admin1 creates an Azure virtual machine named VM1 in RG1. VM1 uses a disk named disk1 and connects to VNet1. Admin1 then installs a custom application in VM1. You need to move the custom application to VNet2, and the solution must minimize administrative effort. Which two actions should you perform? To answer, you need to select the appropriate answer among the options provided. Now the options are on your screen. The first action and the second action. The options you have are detach a virtual interface, a network interface, delete VM1, create a network interface in RG2, and then move a network interface to RG2. Then the second action, you have the options as attach a network interface, move VM1 to RG2, create a network interface in RG2, and create a new virtual machine. You can change the subnet of a VM. Subnet a VM is connected to after it has been created, but you cannot change its VNet. So what you need to do here is identify the disk used by the VM1, which is disk 1 in this case. you delete the VM1 itself while ensuring disk 1 is retained, and then recreate the VM in the target virtual network VNet 2 and attach the original disk 1 to it. So for the first section, you will delete the VM1, and for the second action, you will create a new virtual machine. Obviously, the steps that I explained just now were in detail, but for the scope of this question, the first action would be delete VM1 and the second action would be create a new virtual machine. But before deleting it, you need to retain disk 1, back it up, and then when you have created a new virtual machine, you need to attach disk 1 to it so that your application and data, everything is retained. Let's look at next question. You have an Azure subscription that contains an Azure storage account named Storage 1. You export Storage Account 1 as an Azure Resource Manager template. The template contains the following sections, which you can see on the right-hand side of your screen. Now, you need to go through this template and then answer the questions. For each of the following statements, you need to select if yes, if the statement is true, otherwise you will be selecting no. Now, the first statement is a server that has a public IP address of 131.107.103.10 can access storage 1. Now, you can see in the ARM template, virtual network rules and IP rules are blank in the network ACL's element. And the default action is allow. So, yes, this statement is correct. A server that has a public IP address of 131.107.103.10 can access storage account 1. And in fact, since there are no IP rules mentioned in this ARM template, so for the scope of this question, IP address doesn't really matter at all. Even if there was a different IP address, the answer or the statement would still have been true. Next statement. Individual blobs in a storage account 1 can be set to use the archive tier. The kind of storage here is storage V2, which allows tiering. So even though storage account access tier is set to hot, which you can see at the bottom of the screen, but you can set individual blobs to use archive tier because the storage account type is storage V2. Third statement, global administrators in Azure Active Directory can access a file share hosted in storage account 1 by using their Azure AD credentials. Azure AD roles like global administrator don't provide access to individual resources. So this statement is incorrect. You will need to use RBAC roles to grant access being talked about here. Let's look at next question. You have a pay-as-you-go Azure subscription that contains the virtual machines shown in the following table. There are two virtual machines with the name of VM1 and VM2. They are hosted in resource group RG1 and RG2. And they have a daily cost defined. VM1 uses a daily cost of $20 and a VM2 uses the daily cost of $30. You create the budget shown in the exhibit below, which is on the bottom right of your screen. The AG1 action group contains a user named admin1@cardoso.com only. Select the answer choice that completes each statement based on the information presented in the graphic. So before we move to the question, let's look at the graphic. The name of the budget is budget 1. The scope of the budget is RG1 resource group. And you would see that because the scope of RG1, because the scope of this budget is RG1, and you can see only VM1 is hosted in RG1. So this budget would only apply to VM1. That is the first thing you should note when answering such questions. Now the budget is set to $1,000 and the budget period resets every month. So the $1,000 is the budget for every month. It's not like the budget, this $1,000 is the budget for the whole start to end date. So it resets every month. And now the alert conditions are when the 50% of budget is reached, which is $500, the action group basically sends an email. When 70% is reached, then a SMS is sent. And when 100% is reached, an Azure app is triggered. And the alert recipients are user1@cardoso.com. Now let's look at the statements. When the maximum amount in budget 1 is reached, what will happen? Your options are VM1 and VM2 continue to run. VM1 and VM2 are turned off. VM1 is turned off and VM2 continues to run. When the budget thresholds are reached, which you have created, only notifications are triggered. None of the resources are affected and consumption isn't stopped. So both the VMs will continue to run in this case. Now, the next statement is based on the current usage costs of the virtual machines. The options are no email notifications will be sent each month. 1 email notification will be sent each month. 2 email notifications will be sent each month. 3 email notifications will be sent each month. Now, when we were looking at the budget, I did mention the scope of budget 1 is RG1 and RG1 only contains VM1. That's the thing here. And you could see the VM1 consumes $20 per day. Then the 50%, which is $500 limit, will be reached in 25 days. And an email will be sent, which makes it 1 email in a month. Then the 70% and 100% alert conditions will not be reached within a month because after 30 days, the counter will reset. So they won't trigger any email action in any case because the action was SMS or an app. So the correct answer here is only 1 email notification will be sent each month. Whenever you have questions related to budget, you need to break down the figures and then calculate what action will happen whenever a certain condition is met. Question number 124 of the series. You onboard 10 Azure virtual machines to Azure Automation State Configuration, and you need to use Azure Automation State Configuration to manage the ongoing consistency of the virtual machine configurations. Which 3 actions should you perform in sequence? Your options are create a management group, check the compliance status of the node, assign tags to the virtual machines, compile configuration into node configuration, import configuration to Azure Automation State Configuration. And the correct sequence is now on your screen. First of all, you will import configuration to Azure Automation State Configuration. Then you will compile the configuration into node configuration, and then you will check the compliance status of the node. Next question. You have an Azure subscription that contains the resources as shown below. Resource name is MG1, which is management group type. Then the second resource is RG1, which is resource group type. And then you have a GUID, which is a subscription ID. And then you have a resource called as tag1, which is tag type. In Azure Cloud Shell, you need to create a virtual machine by using an Azure Resource Manager template. How should you complete the command? The command is, now, first of all, you have a variable which is called as $admin password. And in $admin password, what you are doing is read host is to, in PowerShell, read host is to get a prompt from user. You need to input something. There is a prompt. And the prompt says enter the admin password, and it is passed as a secure string because it is obviously password. So you cannot pass it as a plain text. Therefore, you have converted it to as secure string. Now starts the next command. You have 4 options. First, your options are new AZ resource, new AZ template spec, new AZ VM, new AZ resource group deployment. Then you have the next 4 options. Dash tag is tag1, dash group name is MG1, dash resource group name is RG1, dash subscription. Then you have the subscription GUID. Then you proceed next in the command where you have template URI where a URL of GitHub has been mentioned, and then the admin username is local admin and admin password is the variable that you created. Then the DNS level suffix is test VM1. Now from the table, you can see resource group 1 RG1 already exists. So you would be deploying a VM using a ARM template in an existing resource group using the command let new dash AG resource group deployment. Basically, you would be doing a deployment into an existing resource group. So obviously you'll choose new dash AZ resource group deployment in the first dropdown and resource group name RG1 in the second dropdown. Now, you would be tempted to use new dash AZVM in the first dropdown, but you cannot use new dash AZVM as this commandlet doesn't accept the template URI parameter. So you need to look at whole scenario in question, which is to create a VM using ARM template rather than focusing on creating the VM, which is the key to answer this question. Let's look at next question. You have the Azure virtual networks shown in the following table. There are basically 4 virtual networks with VNet 1, VNet 2, VNet 3, VNet 4, and then their address spaces, subnets are mentioned, and the regions where they are hosted. You can see the virtual networks are hosted in different Azure regions. And when it comes to VNet peering, Azure allows peering across regions as well. So you should know this while answering this question. Now, the question is from VNet 2, which virtual networks can you establish a peering connection with? Your options are VNet 1 only, VNet 1 and VM3 only, VNet 3 and VNet 4 only, VNet 1, 3 and 4. Key thing to answer this question is virtual network peering cannot have overlapping address spaces. So if we look at VNet 2 and VNet 4, we can immediately say there will be overlap in the IP address. So you can rule out any option which has VNet 4 in it. This leaves us with option A and option B. VNet 2 can peer with VNet 1 due to the difference in namespace, but it can also peer with VNet 3. So we will rule out option A and choose option B as the correct choice. Even though option A is also right, but the question does have a option where 2 of the VNets are right options. So you need to choose that option because the question specifically asks which virtual network. So if you choose option A, which is VNet 1 only, that would be an incorrect choice because the peering can happen with VNet 3 as well. Let's look at next question. You have an Azure virtual network named VNet 1 that contains a subnet named subnet 1. Subnet 1 contains 3 Azure virtual machines and each virtual machine has a public IP address. The virtual machines host several applications that are accessible over port 443 to users on the internet. Your on-premise network has a site-to-site VPN connection to VNet 1, and you discover that the VMs can be accessed over RDP from internet and from on-premise network as well. This is really not a good practice that your VMs are accessible over RDP from internet. So you need to prevent RDP access to the virtual machines from the internet, which is what is the best practice, unless the RDP connection is established from the on-premise network. The solution must ensure that all the applications can still be accessed by internet users. How can you achieve this requirement? So your application needs to be accessible to users over internet but through HTTPS protocol, which is over port 443, but it shouldn't be accessible to users over port 3389, which is the RDP port here. So I hope this clarifies what is the requirement of the question. Now let's look at what are the options available. You create a deny rule in a network security group NSG that is linked to subnet 1. You modify the address space of subnet 1. You modify the address space of the local network gateway. You remove the public IP address from the virtual machines. To achieve this requirement, you should create a deny rule in the network security group that is linked to subnet 1, which is option A. You can create a network security group rule in Azure that denies incoming RDP traffic from the internet while still allowing the necessary application traffic. You might be tempted to use option D here, which is to remove public IP addresses from VM, but it will prevent all external access, including access from the on-premise network and internet users, which is not in line with the requirement of allowing access from on-premise network while still permitting access to the applications from the internet, which is why option A is the correct choice here. Question number 128 of the series. You have an Azure subscription that contains 2 on-premise locations named Site 1 and Site 2. You need to connect Site 1 and Site 2 by using an Azure virtual WAN. Which of the following 4 actions should you perform in sequence? Your options are create a virtual WAN resource, create VPN sites, connect the VPN sites to the hub, create a virtual hub, connect the virtual networks to the hub. And the correct options are now on your screen. You would first create a virtual WAN resource. You would then create a virtual hub, followed by creating VPN sites, and finally connect the VPN sites to the hub. Remaining option number 5, connect the virtual networks to the hub, is also part of creating a site-to-site connection using Azure Virtual WAN. However, it is later in the process and the question talks about 4 actions in sequence, so it has been excluded. So always pay attention to what has been asked in the question rather than just relying on the facts that the option which has been excluded is still a valid option when you are configuring Azure Virtual WAN. But obviously the question talks about just 4 options, so that's why it has been excluded. All right, folks, I have come to the end of the questions I had planned for this part of our series. If you missed any of the previous segments, you can find links to them in the video's description. If you found the content helpful, I would appreciate your support by giving the video a thumbs up and subscribing to the channel. If you have any doubts, don't forget to post them in the comment section and I'll always come back as soon as possible to answer them. As always, if you have any suggestions or if there's a particular topic you would like to be covered in future questions, please feel free to share your thoughts in the comment section. Enjoy your learning journey.